Yo, what is good, dev guys? Welcome back. In this video, I know you guys are probably tired of the lectures. You probably even skipped the last lecture, didn't you? I bet you skipped it. You know what? There's going to be a pop quiz on that lecture. A pop quiz. I'm joking. But I just want to give you guys a rundown over how the flow of things work inside of Lyra. I know I talked a lot about the game playability system as a whole, but the way Lyra puts these things together is a little bit different. So let's jump right in. The first thing you want to think about and the first thing you want to find and set up is the action. Every ability or majority of abilities will be fired by an input action. Now, you will have some abilities that are given to the player on spawn, like a passive, or they will be activated by some other tag from some other place in the code, but for the most part, everything will be activated via a input action. So the first thing you want to set up is this little puppy here. It's an input action. It looks like this. And the next thing you think about when you open up that thing is, okay, what kind of input is it going to be? Is it going to be a Boolean? Means it's just going to toggle on or off, or is it going to be a float? Is it going to have like an access value? Like if I'm thinking about an access value, I'm thinking about my mouse wheel up or my mouse moving to the left or to the right. That kind of input, what kind of input is going to drive this action? Then once you figure that out, you want to go ahead and get into this input mapping context, and that allows you to map the actions to an actual input as well as give it modifiers and different things. Especially in here is where you can set up the mappable options for the players to be able to map whatever key they want to that input action. Because if you look here, this input action is key agnostic. It doesn't care about any keys. It's just a simple, either a Boolean or a float value or something of that nature. Here is where you actually give it the actual key that will trigger that float value or trigger that Boolean. And you also give it this mappable options here, and you give it this name is just a name to, so the system could say, okay, this is another mappable option by this name. And you also give it a display name that the user can read. Then you give it a key, and that key is what is naturally mapped to it, but they can go in here and set whatever key they want via the system already built in Lyra. After you figure out the mappings, then you want to go ahead and go into the input data. This is a data asset, and it looks like this. It's a data asset that holds the input action and the tag that that input action will fire off, that all abilities are listening to, or realistically, the ability system component is listening for these tags, and then it will fire an ability based off of the tag that's coming in here. So you get this input data, and then you say, okay, this input action sends out this input tag. And then whenever you bind the ability to a tag, whenever the action is pressed and it sends out that tag, the ability is bound to that tag. It's no longer bound to the input. The input is like an initiator. The real workhorse is the tag. The tag will say, okay, hey, my auto run tag has been fired, and then whatever ability has been set up to listen to that specific tag will fire. So that's just a quick rundown of how Lyra wants to set up the flow of how the abilities are triggered and set up. And these are the things you want to make sure you have set up first. So for our sprint ability, what we're going to do is jump in and set these things up first, and then we're going to continue on. So I got the editor open underneath here. Oh, you guys thought this was just a lecture and thought it was going to be over. No, baby, we in here, you dig? I took all these pictures and fucking screenshot all this shit just so I could bust y'all ass. All right, let's go. So what we want to do is, let's come to this input folder here, and I'm going to turn off my filter here. And we want to come to this actions folder here. We want to set up an action for sprint. And action is going to be very similar to something like crouch or jump, where it's just a Boolean value, and we want it to consume the input. So I'm going to Control D, duplicate that, call this IA sprint, and I'm going to save that. And then what's the next thing? The next thing is the mapping. The next thing is the mapping, and we want to decide what button or what key we want to give that specific action. So I'm going to close this while holding Shift, then open it again. That'll close everything from being open. And then I want to add a little plus here and somehow open it again. So I'm going to hold Shift, close this, open it again. And then I'm going to come here and I want to give it my sprint action. And I want to map it to the shift key. That's caps lock to the shift key. If you press this button here and press a key, it'll automatically give you that key. For the triggers, I want to go ahead and say press. That means this has got to be a bug. It's got to be a bug. Press means that we want the player to actually press the key down. It's not going to be like a tap thing. It's got to be pressed down more than halfway. And we probably could say 0.2 just in case anybody maps this to like a trigger or something and they want sprint to be quick. So yeah, we wanted to make sure it's pressed and not tapped or anything like that. And then we want to come down to this, is player mappable, toggle this on. And then we want to give this a name. This is how the system is going to differentiate this mapping versus the mapping for weapon fire auto. So we're going to say sprint. I got caps lock on. So sprint is the name of the mapping context. And then we want to give it the display name of sprint as well. And we don't really care about the category. We could put it in like a movement category, something like that. And then we also want to add an array element to that. I hate that I got to keep doing that. And we want to set it to none. This will allow players to map a secondary input to a specific action. So let's make this player mappable. Let's change this to sprint underscore secondary. And also the same display name as sprint and the same display category movement. All right, so we got that. What was next? Hold on, let me go back to, oh my God, I closed it down. What am I doing? Okay, so the next thing that you want to think about is the input data. So here we got this input data hero, and this allows us to map the input action to a tag that will fire whenever that input action is pressed or triggered. So it's going to be an ability input action. So we want to come down here into this ability input actions, and let's add a field here, and we want to select our sprint action. And then we need to make a tag here, input tag. Let's call it ability. And if we hit this little circle here, we can add a sub tag, and I'm gonna call this sprint. So this action will send out a trigger or a notification that this input tag ability sprint tag has been fired off. And the last thing we would want to set up is an ability set. But since we haven't actually created the ability, we kind of are running into a wall here. So what I usually do, and this is me, is I come into here and I go into, and I don't have a gas folder. Usually I would have a folder like that would say gas, but since I don't, I'm gonna just go to this input and go to abilities here. And this is where they hold all of their input style abilities. So I'm gonna right click in here, create a blueprint class. Let's derive it from Lyra gameplay ability, say GA underscore sprint, and I can save that. And then what I want to do just to make sure that we're getting everything working here is I'm going to print a string that this sprint action is active. And then I want to wait for the input to be released. And let's go ahead and say print string stopping sprint action and then end the ability, right? So this is so we can test that this is going to be given to us and everything that I was just telling you in that little showcase is right? So now that we got the action, or now that we have the ability, we need to put it into an ability set. So I believe there is an ability set here. Here we go. That's the input data. Let's look for ability set shooter hero. This is the base ability set that's given to all characters whenever they start up any type of different experience. We'll get into experiences later, but any type of experience, you automatically get this ability set shooter hero. This is like the global abilities that every person will get. Every bot, if you are using the same input hero data for the bot, if you're using the same pawn data for the bot as the hero, everybody will get this information here. So what we want to do is go into granted abilities and add an array element. And let's go ahead and give us the sprint. And level 1 is fine. And we want to give it the tag that this ability is actually bound to, which is input ability sprint. Let's just type in sprint. So input tag ability sprint is the tag that will fire this ability. And now what we can do is actually go in here and test this, see if it's going to work. It doesn't work. You know, I haven't, like I said, most of these tutorials I do, I don't rehearse them. I just set up a, and what you see here right there, our sprint action is active, but what you're seeing here is that sprint is also bound to the dash in the Lyra. We're going to remove that, but you can see here in the top left, stop and sprint action is active. But this is a big problem in Lyra right now, and I don't think anybody understands that this problem is like annoying. Is I am holding down my sprint key right now, and somehow the input action release fired off. The task to wait for the input to be released fired, but I'm still holding down my sprint key, which is a big issue that we're going to fix, especially when we get to the firing part of the abilities, because the way that they have their shooting ability set up is because of how they set up the inputs. So that's all I want to cover in this video. You guys are ready for the next video? I'll see you in there. Peace.